what we see on the surface, it's almost like when you see that iceberg thing on the poster where you've
Yeah.
got like the tip of it, and they're the symptoms that we're seeing as parents, and they're the things that stress us out and trigger us. But what we're not seeing is like all of the underlying stuff that the children are struggling with, and all those imbalances underneath that are actually driving that top end stuff that we're seeing, that we just see as autism. And that's kind of what we're led to believe, is that all of those surface level things at the top of that iceberg are, what we see as autism. And it's like, oh, that's part of their personality, these are things that can't be changed. But if we look beneath that and just dig a bit lower, we can look at all of the reasons why those things might be happening, and then it can give us a bit more like grace for our children for a start, because we can be thinking, oh, actually the reason they do this is because of this and this, and it's not just them just like trying to like kill me on a daily basis. And also it helps us to sort of unpick and unpeel a bit of that, and let us and give us like lots of hope, because we know that if that on top is just a surface level thing and it's driven by all this underlying stuff that we know is reversible, then we know that that top end stuff can actually
Hmm.
change, and it can get better and improve. And that's really lovely for us to know, isn't it, as parents? So I'm going to just go through just briefly sort of some of the main symptoms that I hear about in practice a lot, and kind of what that can mean. So the first one I want to talk about is dry humping. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I know it's like one of those like topics that's so taboo. And like I have so many parents that, in forums, they don't really want to speak about it, because it's actually like parents find it really mortifying and embarrassing when their children are like, rubbing their genitals and kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
humping on things and stuff like that. And it looks like it's something that the child's doing for pleasure, but actually this is driven by a sensory need, and usually I find it's because there is oxalates gathering in that area, and oxalates are like sharp crystals that form, and in
Yeah.
70% of autistic kids, they have high oxalate levels, and this can be driven by dysbiosis in the gut, it can be driven by fat malabsorption, it can be driven up by mold exposure, lots of different things can drive this issue. And so if those sharp crystals form there, almost like it looks like the child's doing this for kind of joy, but actually it's rubbing that area. And eye poking is another symptom of that. So if your children are eye poking and rubbing there, it's usually because these sharp crystals are gathering in those areas, and they're
No
almost trying to
way.
like rub them out. Yeast overgrowth is another really big driver of dry humping.
Hmm.
And honestly, in practice, I find when we clear yeast overgrowth, that behaviour immediately goes. And then a parent might sort of, I don't know, like they might have gone and done something else, and then like 3 years later there might be like a little uptick in yeast, and they'll be like, oh, actually, like you can see those symptoms correlating, and then the parent sort of gets to know what those are, and then it actually kind of, it makes you feel a bit better, because in that moment it's like, especially if you're out in public, you're thinking, oh my goodness, like this looks so
Yeah.
inappropriate, and
Hmm.
it makes you feel like, oh, like, it makes you feel embarrassed, but the child cannot help that at all. And actually what I've found is that when we're like really oppressive and trying to stop our kids doing things, it almost builds more stress in the body and makes them do it more. So it's kind of one of those things where of course we can redirect, but because it's a biological thing, an imbalance that's causing that, there's no way of really stopping them doing that until we kind of heal the gut, or like do the things that we need to do to like eliminate oxalates or yeast, so that
Hmm.
that behavior stops. So I think like that's really important to note as well, is like when your children are having some of these behaviors, it is like they cannot help any of them. It's like it is part of an imbalance that's in their body that's driving this, and trying to say, changing that without any healing is very difficult. By just saying, stop doing that, stop doing that, the child can't stop doing that, because there's a biological thing driving that behavior. And I think that's really important, because obviously the child's not doing that deliberately, and then we're kind of just putting more stress into the child. So
Yeah, I
um
think when Archie was young, I used to think that um, some of the behaviours he was doing it on purpose. And
yeah,
then
me too.
when I truly realised that he just couldn't help some of these things, like listening was one. He's not listening to
Mm,
me. He's not following
yeah.
the instructions. It's not because he didn't want to, he just couldn't.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, you got to forgive yourself, but also then
Yeah.
forgive them.
Yeah, of course. And it was the same with Rose. There were so many things like vocal stimming. I'll move on to that one. So, lots of our kids have stimming behaviours, of course. And that's like something that is really, so these two I find are some of the most triggering, and then Pika, which I'll move on to next. But, um, when our children stim, it can be really overstimulating for us who probably haven't slept because our child hasn't slept all night. Like Rose was up all night, not sleeping, and then all day she would go, ah. So it was almost like torture from both ends. It's like my brain couldn't take any more. And obviously, it's like, it's not her fault. Obviously, in the moment, you just want to strangle their neck a little bit and sort of like stop it from, like do something to just stop the noise. But they can't help it. When children stim, and it can be vocal, they could flap, they might spin, they might flick things, there might be like another repetitive behavior. But obviously they are self-soothing. And like before we move into like the medical situation, I think it's really important to understand that stimming for our kids obviously is driven by imbalances, but it's a way of them self-regulating. We all actually do that in like a more sort of functional and acceptable social way, but obviously in our children it doesn't look like that because they have no idea of what social norms are. So of course to them, if they just want to spin for an hour, if they want to flap like they're going to take off like a bird, or they want to go like they don't understand what social norms are. So of course they will do that because it feels good in their body and they're trying to self-soothe in that moment. And so some of the sort of like underlying like medical causes for this are retained primitive reflexes, which obviously Lara you know all about because that's to do with like the vagus nerve and some of the brain hemispheres not being like as wired together as they should be, and that can cause overwhelm in the sensory system. And so they're kind of like they're almost like they're, because humming, it will regulate, or it kind of like helps your vagus nerve
Yeah.
in terms of like the balance. So that's one of the reasons why our kids go because it's like it feels good in the body. That's why some of them jump. It's like they're self-soothing, and that's what stimming is, isn't it? It's a
Yeah.
self-stimulating, self-soothing
Yeah.
behavior to kind of
Archie used to like spin. He used to spin just one way all the time. And that's vestibular system. He needs input into his vestibular system because it was weaker one side. It's amazing.